the I Feed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 103, Game of Thrones miniseries episode 3, What Can House Baratheon Teach Us About Security Buy-In? So, House Baratheon. In the beginning of the series, Game of Thrones, and A Song of Fire and Ice, the Baratheon house is in charge, they're the ones in charge. Robert Baratheon runs the kingdom. He's the king. His wife is Cersei Lannister, or Cersei Baratheon. I don't know. She's the one. She's his queen. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And again, one of the things that I said at the beginning of this miniseries is that, spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil the entire fucking thing. And so if you haven't read it and you want to be surprised, well, I guess stop listening. But otherwise, what happens in the books is that Robert Baratheon dies. He's actually murdered by his wife, Cersei. There's a plot to kill him. Basically, Baratheon's a drunk, and he drinks too much wine, and then goes hunting, and then gets gored by a boar, and then dies of his injuries. And as soon as he dies, Cersei puts their son, quote unquote, Joffrey, onto the throne, and then has Ned Stark arrested, which is basically the premise for the entire rest of the show and book series, is the war that this causes, this whole insurrection, political gaffe, this arrest causes. So then the rest of the series is basically about how the rest of the land is going to react or reacts to these few events. So when Ned Stark is killed and the North basically declares war, Robert Baratheon's brothers, Stannis and Renly, also declare war against King's Landing and declare Joffrey to be an illegitimate king because Joffrey is not Robert's son, and everybody can see that because he's blonde, where every other Baratheon across the family line has been dark-haired. And so something doesn't quite sit right with anybody about Joffrey being king, apart from the fact that he's a complete prick. I mean, he's bad enough that he makes other evil characters look benign in comparison. I mean, the dude had Ned Stark killed just on a whim, just cause, as opposed to every one of his advisors saying, let him live, make him wear the black, whatever. He just kills Ned Stark, which is just absolutely insane, and is what causes the eventual downfall of the entire kingdom. Because later on, as shit happens, Joffrey dies, and then his little brother takes the throne, and Tommen is king for a week, and then he kills himself, and then Cersei takes the throne. And this is just a whole fucking mess. This is a whole mess of succession and bullshit. And if you're really into politics, that's fun. But really, it's the operations that the situations that happen between all of these deaths that make this a really compelling story. Anyway, the whole point of this is that it's really difficult to have a plan of succession. It's really difficult to have any sort of idea of how you're going to run your organization if you don't have people who are going to back your plan and help you push security through, or help you push anything through, really. But in this term, security it requires people to buy into the security plan, the security stance. You can't run an organization securely without having people buy into it and understand why security is important to them, to their jobs, to the company, and to whatever sort of operation that you have running. And what I mean by this is that, you know, when you have an organization that has a security plan, has a security policy and procedures and all of this, you can have all the technical controls. You can have all of the bells and whistles for security. You can buy every security appliance. You can buy every piece of security software, run the best EDR, have the best managed services available. And none of that fucking matters if your users are letting the attackers in through the front door. That's kind of it. Base one, you cannot do anything other than that. You cannot do anything if your users are not capable of preventing compromise for your organization. And the reason why is because an attacker, that's what they do. They get around the solutions. They get around the technical controls. That's how they work. That's what they do for fun. Getting in is the hardest part for them. And if you have somebody who's just going to let them in, then you basically don't have security. You need to have security buy-in in order for people to keep your business secure. And this is why if you train people properly and you give them the tools to do their jobs properly, and they understand why security features are important and also then follow those security protocols, everything remains relatively secure. But as soon as you remove that knowledge or don't train it in, or you don't have people who understand or buy into it, that is where you have a problem. And so, how do you test for this? Well, you could do tests of loyalty, acts of loyalty, prove to me you're loyal, or you could test your folk. This is why we have phishing simulation tests. This is why you have emails that go out to people to try to get them to click on malicious links or unknown links. And this is why you track that data. But you also have to follow up on that. You also have to be like, hey, you clicked on a bad link in an email that you should not have trusted. These are all the reasons why. What are you doing? Do you even know how a computer works? And you have to actually walk through this process with people in order to keep them honest. But also there are other things like making sure that employees have the tools necessary for them to follow proper security guidelines. If an employee doesn't feel like they have the power to question people, even a little bit, that will eliminate them from being able to perform the proper tasks necessary to keep your business or your organization secure. I'll put it in a very real manner. We do physical penetration tests. I do physical penetration tests for clients not infrequently. And I had an organization who has a facilities team that works across their 32 different sites. And this facilities team basically goes in unannounced a lot of times and does work on systems and like HVAC and the doors and lighting and all of that. And so they get into some pretty sensitive areas of every building. And I decided I was going to target this one particular site where I had heard there was a security problem there. Not necessarily a security problem, but the front desk person had asked one of their facilities people at some point. They had asked them. It was probably 6 months before I had done my physical penetration test. But the front desk person had asked the facilities person for credentials, basically. Hey, I need you to prove who you are. You don't have a badge. You didn't show up in a company vehicle. There's no way for me to know that you actually belong here. And the front desk person got reamed by this facilities person. And they laid into her, like, how can you do this? I've been working for this company for 15 years, blah, 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 blah. And just like fucking tore this poor woman a new one. And so then when I showed up, happy, willing to help, wanting just to do my job as somebody who was conceivably as part of this facilities team, she said, okay, and let me through and didn't think anything of it. And then when I went back to her and brought that as a finding to her bosses, they were like, well, how could this happen? I was like, well, because she did not feel like she could question me. And I was so helpful that she didn't have any reason to want to pursue a question. And you have to give your people that ability. Now that's a small frame and that's a small kind of scope. But in reality, I was able to get into that building. I was actually able to get into their data processing, their data center in that building and pull hardware. I was able to do that without showing any badge or any identification. I just did it. And that is kind of indicative of how this occurs in an organization. But it's not just people walking in the front door. It's also emails and people clicking links and things like that. If you don't arm people or don't train people to be suspicious about everything that they're doing or to notice the problems that they have, you are not getting their buy-in. You are not allowing them to buy in. And, it's similar to the whole Baratheon thing where if Cersei had just made sure that everybody was on board with Joffrey being king instead of just the people in King's Landing, if she had made sure that everybody was on board with Joffrey being king, then when she killed Robert Baratheon, or when Robert Baratheon ended up drinking himself to death, it wouldn't have been a problem. But because there was this whole thing where she just did it, she just killed this dude, she killed the king, and then placed her son on the throne, she didn't get buy-in to her operation. She didn't get buy-in to that. Moreover, Joffrey didn't get buy-in to killing Ned Stark before he did that, which caused a whole shitstorm down the line. But also, there's Stannis Baratheon, who could have gotten buy-in for his claim to the throne before deciding to get all of his people killed several different times, then eventually barbecuing his daughter. These buy-ins need to happen before action is actually occurring. And it's not just that active buy-in where, hey, you are explicitly saying a thing and then people are doing it. It's also the passive buy-in. It's the things that people do day in and day out that make them understand when they can raise a question and when they can do a thing, or when something is suspicious. And in this is a really good example. I have a really good example of this that actually did happen, and that we don't fully appreciate normally as security practitioners. But it's with that MFA fatigue, which you guys have probably heard a few times, where you have to sign in too many times, or if you have to use MFA too many times, it really can just numb you to the fact that you're being asked for MFA. And so then when you get asked MFA out of place, it kind of makes it whatever, this is normal. Well, one of the things that you have in a situation where you have a complex login scheme or login flow, one of the questions that I've been asked before is, well, wouldn't it make sense just to have people sign in every time they open up their browser? Like, wouldn't that just be better? It's like, well, let's think about what that trains people to do logically. That trains people that every time I click on a link or click on an object or open up a browser, I have to sign in. That one is really fucking annoying for the users. Users will throw up their hands and revolt if that should happen. So that's bad because they don't like the experience. User experience sucks. And security, while it's not our primary job, user experience should be an aspect of how we consider solutions and how we consider to implement things. So for that reason alone, it's a pretty bad idea. But the other thing that you're training them to do is you're training them to just sign in anytime they see that login page. And so, for instance, if you have somebody sign into Office 365 every time they open up a browser, that's going to cause them to just automatically it's going to cause them to go into autopilot anytime they see that fucking login page. What is actually a better idea is to make sure they never see that login page at all. Because what you want is you want them to raise a flag when they see that login page. You want them to go, this isn't normal. This login page is not what I normally see when I try to do an operation. Because what you want them to do is you want them to identify when an attacker is attempting to gain access to their account. And they do that through bullshit and illegitimate login pages. And if they are trained, if they expect to never have to sign in and then they all of a sudden have to, that will cause them to pause. It'll at least give them the opportunity to pause. But that passive buy-in that you're looking for doesn't happen if you just go with the quote unquote most secure option. So, in the whole grand scheme, this is a reality that we have to face as security practitioners is how do we implement solutions and architecture for security without causing user experience issues, without training users to ignore security protocols, without making sure that we are actually defeating ourselves by doing the thing that seems most secure instead of what is actually most secure. So, what we want to do as security practitioners in order to get this passive buy-in in other ways is we also want to provide users with the capacity to understand and raise flags easily. One of the other barriers of entry into reporting is that if it's too complicated to submit a ticket, if it's too complicated to call support, if it's too complicated to let somebody know that there's a potential threat, that information can just go by the wayside. A very real situation occurs when a user clicks on the link, submits their credentials, goes, oh, this isn't normal, and then is like, well, I guess I'll just wait until somebody says something about it, because they don't know how to report things, or they don't feel like it's worth their time, or it's too time consuming. That's when we defeat ourselves as well in that security buy-in. We don't have security buy-in at that level. Another thing to make sure of is that you have your own security buy-in. One of the things that you cannot do as a security practitioner, as an administrator, as any CEO, is have your own fucking security protocols ignored on your own systems. It is one of the most common issues I have at any business, is that business owners feel like they know better, system administrators feel like they know better, security practitioners feel like they know better, and so they don't want to have whatever solutions are in place installed and running because they feel like they're the exception to the rule. Well, guess what? Every fucking person feels like they're an exception to the goddamn rule. You are no special person. You have to follow the rules like everybody else. Does not matter. Follow your own guidelines. Buy yourself into your own security. Make sure you are leading the charge instead of just allowing somebody to tell you that you're the king of King's Landing and then using that as the litmus to then give yourself all of the control. Doesn't fucking work. Anyway, in the end, the biggest thing is that, Robert Baratheon only had one real son that survived, and Gendry Baratheon did not want to be king, but he did end up getting the fucking Stark. So there's that. That was real weird. That's a real weird ending. I don't want to end on it, but I don't have anything else. I hope y'all come back. A great day.